Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for taking time out of your schedule to spend some time with me today. Before I get into the official presentation, I just want to pose to you, think about this question. Why do people go into business? And in some cases, it may seem like a rhetorical question, but when we ask this, particularly of business leaders, many times I get the response, oh, because I was passionate about an issue or a cause or a product or a service. And while that's great, that's not quite it. Sometimes I get the response, well, I want to help people. I want to help as many people as possible. That also is great, but not quite it. Because think about it, you can be passionate and you can help people and not get paid. There's a word for that. We call it volunteering. And so why do people go into business? Well, as a business owner, I can tell you, we go into business to make money, and that's okay. But sometimes people think that when we're talking about social issues and we're talking about the welfare and well-being of other individuals, that it's not okay to attach profit to those types of issues. So today, as we talk about the profitability of inclusion, I want you to just remember that it's okay to make a profit on social reform, on racial justice, on societal justice, because that's why people go into business. So with that, let me share my screen with you and let's get started talking about inclusion is profitable. The numbers don't lie. Now, there may be some skeptical people who will say, well, you can make numbers say anything you want them to, and that's true. But that's the people manipulating the numbers. The numbers themselves tell a story. And if we're honest with the way we present our numbers, the numbers don't lie. So as we're talking about inclusion, let me just answer the question of what is inclusion? How are we defining it for our purposes here today? So for today's discussion, inclusion refers to the act of making anyone, an individual or a group, feel welcomed, respected, supported, and valued to fully participate. And so again, inclusion becomes profitable when we have all hands on deck, when everyone is feeling those things and they are bringing their whole selves to work and contributing 100%. Inclusion puts the concept and practice of diversity into action. Now, when I started in this work, more than 25 years ago, we just called it diversity. Now we talk about diversity and inclusion, and then diversity, equity, and inclusion. And belonging is being tacked onto the back in some cases as well, because we've learned that diversity by itself isn't enough. Diversity put into action by inclusion is what gets us a little bit further down the journey. So inclusion puts the concept and practice of diversity into action by creating an environment. This is the cultural piece of it, where the richness of ideas and backgrounds and perspectives and so many other things are all harnessed to create business value. So inclusion, inherent in its concept and definition, is for business value. And we often quantify value. So again, the numbers come into play. Now let's take a quick poll. I want to find out how inclusive your organization is. So Lee, if you would put that poll up for us, I want you to respond on a scale from 1 to 10 and just let us know how inclusive your organization is when it comes to anyone who is not a cisgender white male. And if cisgender is a new term for you, that means an individual whose identity matches their birth identity. So for white males who are straight, not gay white males, not transgender white males, but if your organization is inclusive to everyone else, that's what we want to know. So 1 would mean not inclusive at all, and we're doing this on a scale from 1 to 10. So just take a moment, please, and say, how inclusive do you think your organization is? And then we will take a look at the results. Give you a few seconds to do that. Most organizations in America today recognize that they have room to become more inclusive. And we're at a point in our country's history where more than ever before, we are seeing, not just hearing about, but seeing that we are not as diverse and inclusive as perhaps we thought we were, and definitely not as diverse and inclusive as we'd like to be. All right, so here are our results. And very good. There are some that are out of 10. About 13% of you said that your organization is extremely inclusive. That is great. Then I say the next one would be about, well, the highest one is a 7, 21%. 20% say 8. And as you can see by looking, there are still quite a few that have a ways to go. All right, so that just gives us an idea of the importance of this topic today. Now, I also want to talk to you a little bit about this term called unconscious bias. This is something that you've probably been hearing a lot about recently, if not in years past. But I'm defining unconscious bias as those automatic associations or quick judgments that are made without your awareness. That's why they're called unconscious. And many times it's made without your intention. You don't intend to offend, but you do because it's outside of your control. Anything that goes into your brain, into your psyche, remains there. And so some things are in what we consider the conscious mind, and those are the things that help us make decisions rationally. We think about those things, we're aware of them. But there's a lot of information that goes into the subconscious, and it operates on an unconscious level. So for example, you might run into an individual that you haven't seen in years, and a memory comes up for you. Perhaps something that happened when you were a child. You hadn't thought about it. You didn't even remember that that thing happened. It was tucked away in your unconscious thinking, and it was operating behind your conscious mind, but it took something to trigger it for you. That's sort of how unconscious bias works. Many of the things that we see in the news or movies or that are in pop culture today formulate in our brains, and they form opinions that we don't even think about on a conscious level. But many times something will trigger that and it comes out for us. And that's one of the main things that keeps us from being as inclusive as we could be. So with that as a backdrop, why look at the numbers? Well, business is based on numbers. We're concerned about the number of clients or customers that we have. We're concerned about sales and revenue, turnover and attrition, employee engagement, employee morale, employee satisfaction, and the list goes on and on and on. Even things that are typically qualitative, like feelings, we quantify. So we'll say, how do you feel on a scale from 1 to 10? Feelings are not quantitative, they're qualitative, but we find a way to attach numbers to them. So inclusion, is just another one of those things in the workplace that helps tell the story about how effective and efficient and productive and profitable an organization happens to be. So we look at the numbers because data helps. Data helps us make better decisions. If we're looking at making a purchase for our business, we need to look at the budget to find out how much money is there. If we're looking to bring in some new employees, do we have the amount of work that will justify bringing new people on board, as well as the budget to be able to pay for them? Data helps us solve problems. We need information, whether it's quantitative or qualitative, to help us get to the root of a problem and come up with a solution. It helps us understand performance. When we're looking at who performs well, we need information or data. And the converse of that is true as well. If we need to know how to improve performance or improve processes, data helps. When it comes to understanding our client base, our consumers, we need to know, what do people like? What do they dislike? What patterns of behavior do they demonstrate? When do they buy? Even in something like this with a webinar, what times of year are best to do webinars? What time of day? When do people show up? When are they too busy taking vacations or doing other things? And then, of course, we think about it from a sales perspective. Data helps us increase sales. Now, regardless of what your job title might be, understand that if you're in business, you're in sales. That took me a while to wrap my mind around, because I really don't like selling. I would not think of taking a sales job if the title had something to do with sales. But we're all selling all day long. We're selling ourselves. We're selling ideas. We're selling products. We're selling services. We're selling an approach to doing business. We're selling our department or our unit to another department or unit. We are in sales all day long. And the more data that we have, the more we can efficiently and effectively increase our sales. So let's look at numbers. IBM, small little company you may have heard about. It's been around for quite some time. In 1998, now, yes, that's a long time ago, and that's exactly why I picked this example, because even back in 1998, IBM was thinking about these issues. In 1998, IBM had revenues of about $10 million. As a result of implementing a diversity task force initiative, IBM grew its female executive ranks by 370%, its ethnic minority executive ranks by 233%, and the number of self-identified gay, lesbian, bisexual, and transgender executives by 733%. Those are phenomenal increases. We don't see those kinds of numbers. In 2001, the organization's activities accounted for more than 300 million in revenue. Now, if you look at the difference between 2001 and 1998, only a 3-year period of time, but because of the increased diversity and the inclusion that went along with it, the organization saw an increase of $290 million in revenue. Now, at some point in my career, I've been in business for myself for many years, but I've had clients who invited me to come in and work inside their organization. I accepted that challenge on 3 occasions. The first one was with IBM. So I was leading diversity and inclusion initiatives at IBM for a period of time. And I remember when we were going through some of the task force initiatives and some of the work that was being done. IBM was so far above the curve when it came to their initiatives in this area. And as you can see, it had a great payoff for them. So some of you might be thinking, okay, well, that's great for a company the size of IBM. We're not that large. So let's look at a smaller industry. Let's look at law firms. There's data that would suggest that law firms as an industry, that industry is one of the least diverse in the country. Highly diverse law firms report on average much higher profits per partner and revenue per lawyer than the rest of the American Law 200 firms. Even controlling for hours, location, and firm size, a firm ranked in the top quarter in the diversity rankings will generate more than $100,000 of additional profit per partner than a peer firm of the same size in the same city with the same hours and leverage, but a diversity ranking in the bottom quarter of firms. Now, this concept also applies to other firms that are structured similar to a law firm. So an accounting firm, for instance, it's the concept that you need to take away. So you can be a small firm and still per partner generate lots of money. So again, more diversity, more profit. And then one more example I want to show you. Sodexo, you may be familiar with them. Sodexo is a French food services and facilities management organization. With women currently comprising half of their board, that's almost unheard of. But with women comprising half of the board, 32% of senior leaders, and close to 50% of its total workforce, Sodexo is among the most gender diverse companies in the industry group and in their home country. It is notably also among the most successful financially within our McKinsey data set. This data comes from McKinsey, with value creation that is 13% above the industry average. Now, Catalyst, you may have heard of Catalyst. Catalyst is an organization that looks at women in leadership and women's issues in the workplace. And Catalyst says that the number one characteristic that a woman needs to be successful in leadership is confidence. We do all kinds of training around confidence and empowering women to lead, and that's one of the foundational things. So imagine if we helped make women more confident. One of the things that would help would be giving them positions that they're qualified for, like board memberships, senior leaders, etc. Because we can see the numbers that Sodexo has seen. And so I ask you, does your organization have numbers like this? Is your board half women? Are 32% of the senior leaders in your organization women? So much of the time we'll have women in an organization, even in some of our clients that are in healthcare, for instance. We've done work inside of hospital organizations. And because the field of nursing, by and large, is female dominated, we'll see large numbers of women, but where are they positioned in the organization? Are they in senior positions? Are they among the doctors? Are they among the higher ranking administrators of the organization? So again, you have to not only look at how diverse in terms of gender or ethnicity and race and age and sexual orientation and the whole spectrum of things, not only how diverse are we in general, but do we show that same level of diversity or those same percentages as we rise up in the organization? And as we get more to the core business of the organization, because again, many times you'll find women and people of color in lower level positions, and you'll find them in more staff oriented positions, positions like HR, positions like communications. And I'm not saying anything negative about those positions. They are key to the organization. However, look inside of the core business. What does the percentage of women look like in terms of sales, in terms of finance, in your legal department, outside of the paralegals, et cetera? So those are just 3 examples of companies that are known around the world, or types of industries like law firms, that we can look at to see when they become more diverse, they become more profitable. All right, so let's talk a little bit about profitability. Less diversity, less profit. Companies in the 4th quartile on both gender and ethnic diversity are more likely to underperform their industry peers financially. Now that's key, because I didn't say that they're going to be average. I said they are underperforming their peers. And many times, unless you're doing benchmarking specific to diversity and inclusion, you really don't know how you're performing or why you're performing the way you are. Now, some people think it's hard to measure inclusion. It's not. There are some really good surveys out there. And in fact, if you want information, by all means, give me your information in the chat, or at the end of the presentation, you will have my information and I can share with you. There's a very good survey that we use that looks at a number of workplace indicators as well as core competencies. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those competencies towards the end of the presentation. But you can get a gauge on how inclusive your organization is. And again, specifically, they are 29% more likely than the other 3 quartiles to underperform on profitability. Just because you have diversity doesn't mean you have inclusion, but you can't achieve inclusion without diversity. So there's another poll I want us to take. So Leah, if you would put that one up for us, please. All right, I'm going to shift gears and talk to you a little bit about something called microaggressions. And a microaggression, just so you know before you answer, a microaggression would include comments or actions that are subtle often in nature, but can either intentionally or unintentionally express a biased attitude towards a marginalized group. So here are some marginalized groups. And before I share the data with you, just vote for which one group do you think experiences microaggressions the most? Would you say that it's white women, Asian women, Black women, lesbian women, or Latina women? And we'll share the results in just a moment. All right, thank you, Leah. All right, so we have 54% say Black women. And the next group then would be lesbian women at 21%, Latina women at 10, Asian women at 9, white women at 6%. Great. Let's see how close you've come to some of that. All right, so this represents some of the survey results from a survey that McKinsey & Company, if you're not familiar with McKinsey, they are a well-known organizational development type of firm. They do lots of research in terms of leadership and social justice and those kinds of things. They're organizational development. And so one of the things that McKinsey has done is they did a survey to see how women and men compared with microaggressions, but they broke the groups of women down into all women, white women, Asian women, Latina women, Black women, and lesbian women. So this shows the percentage of employees who've experienced the following during the normal course of business. The first one was having your judgment questioned in your area of expertise. So imagine showing up and being the subject matter expert and people questioning you and wanting to know, are you sure? Is that right? That can't be, and double checking you on their phone. Now, all men, out of all the men who were surveyed, 27% of them said that they did have their judgment questioned in their area of expertise. But even women, all women, had more experience with that, 36%. It was the same for white women, 29% for Asian women, 32% for Latinas, 40% for Black women, 37% for lesbian women. Another question they asked was needing to provide more evidence of your competence than others do. Now, I tell you, sometimes when we consult in corporate America and we get involved in some of the succession planning, there are some people who get promoted based on potential, while other people have to have a proven track record. And the way that that usually plays out is whites and males will often get promoted on the basis of potential, particularly white males, whereas women and people of color don't. So you'll hear conversations about things like, well, you know, I'm sure he's up for the challenge. He's a great guy. Look at the numbers that he got over here, the same way he did it over here. I'm sure he can do it in the next area as well. You hear things like that. But when it comes to the women and the people of color, we say, well, we don't want to move them too quickly. We don't want to put her in a situation where she might fail. So let's make this a lateral or keep them where they are right now, see how well they do, and then we'll give them that opportunity. Now, of the men who reported, 16% of them said they had experienced something like that. Almost double the women at 31%. 29 for white women, 36 for Asian women, 30% Latinas, 42% Black women, 34% lesbian women. Being addressed in a less than professional way. Again, 16% for men, 26% for all women, stayed in the 20s across for other groups of women. And the last one, being mistaken for someone at a much lower level. I've experienced that personally myself. I've gone into situations where one of my former assistants was a white woman about the same age as I am. And quite often, if we walked in and people didn't know us, they spoke to her as if she was Dr. Wiley and I was her assistant with her. Now, when you look at it again, double for all women. But for those of you who said Black women experience the microaggressions more, congratulations, you're exactly right. Look down that column and the number is the highest in that column than any other column. Now, in some places, I think there are one or two instances where it's the same as another group, but there's no group that experiences microaggressions more. So when you look at the fact that all women are experiencing microaggressions to a greater extent than the men, it lets us know that we're not including women. So how much knowledge, experience, expertise is going out of the window because we're not tapping in. You know, there was a comment when Sheryl Sandberg first came out with her book, Lean In, where lots of women of color were saying, lean into the table and the conversation. We're not even in the room. And I think some of this bears that out. So we have to be mindful of this. And this touches on another subject, something called intersectionality. Now, we don't have time to get into intersectionality today, but it raises the fact that we are more than just one thing. And if you belong to a number of marginalized groups all at the same time, you are more likely to experience microaggressions because they're coming at you from all of those different angles. And sometimes you don't know which one it is. So let's say you are a Black female lesbian woman. You don't know if the microaggression is because you're Black, because you're female, or because you're lesbian. So it becomes more challenging for some of us to decipher than for others of us to decipher what is it. And we start judging ourselves, critiquing ourselves. Is it me? Is it the way I'm coming across? Am I really not qualified? That gets in the way and eats up a lot of energy as well. So speaking of Sheryl Sandberg, this comes from Lean In. I thought it was a great cartoon. It's like, here you have two women of color at a conference. The gender diversity conference is one direction and 1A. The racial diversity conference is in another direction, 1B. Which one is for us? Because we are often discriminated against and not given opportunities because of the unconscious biases and the microaggressions that happen as a result of race and as a result of gender. So for some groups, there's this double bind. And as I said, add on something from the LGBTQIA plus community, or something from people with disabilities, or whatever the case might be, and the situation just becomes more profound. I'm going to stop at this point just for a moment to see, Leah, are there any questions that I can answer for people right now?
Yes, we have one. And it says, from the microaggression poll, do we know who was doing the questioning of judgment, who was asking for evidence of competence, who addressed in less than professional way, and who mistook someone at much lower level?
Okay, good question. Typically, and I can't speak specifically for this particular survey because I don't remember with this one. You can look it up. It was done by McKinsey and Company, a 2018 survey, but I've seen a number of these surveys. Typically, it's happening from whites and males, and most often white males. So that's sort of where it comes from, but that doesn't mean that it doesn't happen from others as well. Women will sometimes question other women. People of color will sometimes question other people of color. Sometimes questioning people with respect to their expertise may not be a bad thing. I don't want you to take that as a takeaway. If you don't know an individual and they come in and you're questioning their expertise, to some extent, that's not a bad thing. Where it becomes a bad thing is if there's a pattern of, you tend to question women of color more than you do white women, or you tend to question women in general more than you do men, or you tend to question people who are of a sexual orientation different than your own. That's where it comes into play. So I'll give an example of something that I experienced maybe a month or two ago, and I posted this on LinkedIn. It causes us to think. I walked into a store in a predominantly white neighborhood, and I walked in to purchase some jewelry, and I was looking at the earrings that were on a rack. A saleswoman, white saleswoman, came up to me and asked if she could help. No, I'm doing fine, thank you. That was just good customer service. Another white woman comes up and asks if she can help. No, I'm doing fine, thank you. Again, customer service. So she and I started a little conversation, and we're chatting a little bit. She told me where I could look in the store for some other earrings. And then she asked to hold the earrings that I had in my hand at the counter. Now, I only had two. So it's not like they were heavy. It's not like I was weighted down with lots of things in my arms. And maybe that's just a normal loss prevention method that they use. Maybe. But as a Black person in that store, in that neighborhood, it causes me to wonder, does that mean that she might think that I'm going to do something, steal these earrings? Why would you need to hold them? Maybe I want to look at them and compare them to others that I see in the store. So again, maybe it was just customer service and loss prevention. Some people have to ask themselves that question. Other people don't. We come into situations when you're a person of color, you get followed around stores, you get followed around the mall. You're a person of color, you sometimes get pulled over by police just because you're driving a car that they think is too expensive to be yours, or you're in a neighborhood where they think you don't belong. And those kinds of things happen. So in that situation, I can't honestly say with that particular survey that I know who was asking the questions, but I can tell you from more than 25 years in this industry and double that as a woman of color in America, that these things happen on a regular basis. They happen more often than not. And when they happen, it's usually, in my experience, it's usually someone who is white, and particularly in the business world, white males who ask the questions more than anyone else. Anything else before we move on?
That is all I'm seeing for now.
All right, thank you. So, inclusion is profitable. We need to have 100% from 100% of our employees 100% of the time. Now, that may seem like a very lofty goal, and in fact it is, but think about it. You're paying them 100% of their salary or wages, so why would you not expect 100% of their full contribution and participation? What would you settle for? 50%, we want to get 50% from 62% of our employees 79.5% of the time. Again, we're looking at numbers. We quantify everything. So why not shoot for 100%? Because we know that the more diversity and inclusion, the more profit we can make. Take a deeper look at that. Here are some benefits to being an inclusive organization. So research shows us that you get higher job satisfaction when people feel that they're included. Remember, our definition talks about being welcomed and respected and valued and supported. When you're feeling that in an organization, the sky's the limit. You don't mind contributing and doing whatever you're asked to do. So job satisfaction is higher. And because job satisfaction is higher, turnover goes down. We're not losing as many people. Turnover is expensive. We need to hold on to folks. It is expensive to go through a sourcing, hiring, interviewing, onboarding, and training process in order to replace an employee. When people feel included, productivity goes up. And that's why we can be more profitable. Productivity goes up. People don't call out sick from work. They are engaged in what they're doing. They're happy to be doing it, and they work better. They don't have to second guess decisions. They don't have to wonder if they can trust. All of these things tend to go away. There's better morale. There's improved creativity and innovation. Again, some examples from my consulting past. So General Motors was a client of an organization that I was consulting for before I started my own business. And one of the things that the vice president of HR told us was that at GM, when they first came out with SUVs, they didn't have the running board to step on to get into the SUV. And GM, through their research, and this is very widely known at this point, that when it comes to buying automobiles, 75% of the decision is made by the woman in the family. And doesn't matter whether she's going to be driving the car or if she's married to a man, if he's going to be driving the car. 75% of the decision comes from the woman. And so the SUVs weren't selling as well initially as they thought they would. And when the HR vice president talked to his daughter, who had just graduated from law school and was driving something else, actually even by someone that not made by GM, he started questioning her about it. And she said, you try being in a skirt and wearing heels and climbing up into that vehicle. Made sense. So GM started adding the running board to their SUVs. Another example, when I was growing up, the laundry, the washer and dryer was in the basement of the home that I grew up in. As women started getting involved in architecture and design and construction, now you find that the laundry room is on the same level in newer homes where the laundry is generated. So in a home like mine, for instance, it's not in the basement, it's not on the main floor, it's upstairs because that's where the bedrooms are. And again, women getting involved in the creativity and innovation process realized that why should we have to carry baskets of laundry 2 flights down only to then carry them back up 2 flights. So we get improved creativity and innovation because we're looking at things from different experiences and perspectives. That also helps with the problem solving and with organizational flexibility many times. Now organizations are doing cross training. We're working largely in teams. There are open environments, or at least pre-COVID, we had lots of open environments. There were all types of things going on. People working remotely from home, all of the flexibility. It will be interesting to see what of those things continue and which ones we now have to change as a result of the pandemic. But being inclusive allows for some of those things. And what we do know is that we still have remained agile and flexible, because look at all of the work that is taking place remotely. Look at the new ideas that have come up, even in terms of how you shop, curbside pickups, deliveries to your home of things that were not delivered previously. So yeah, creativity and innovation increases the more perspectives we have. And the result, or another result, is sharper employees. Now, this work that I'm about to show you comes from another great consulting firm called Deloitte. Deloitte took a look at this thing called inclusion, and they were trying to understand, how do we make leaders more inclusive? And what is it about certain leaders that makes them more inclusive? They came up with 6 things, and we'll go through each one of them, but I want you to think about it like this. Let's say you're about to buy a car. There are some things that a car absolutely has to have in order for it to go. So you've got to have an engine, have to have a transmission. You need something to steer it and control it. You need a way of stopping it, some brakes. You need the tires. It'd be great to have something to sit on. I mean, they're just some basics that you have to have. That's sort of, in my opinion, what these characteristics are. It doesn't mean that there aren't other things that make leaders even more inclusive, more agile, more or better at emotional intelligence. I mean, we could make this a luxury leader, just like you can add more things to that car to make it a luxury car. So this is just the 6 signature traits, the things that you have to have. And we'll go through each one of these, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you get there. So one is commitment. Commitment is important because you have to be able and willing to stick through this journey from start to finish. It takes 10 to 15 years on average for the culture of an organization to change. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't start and see incremental things along the way, but for a culture to truly be transformed, it's a long journey. So commitment is one of the things that inclusive leaders have to have. And commitment refers to things like allocating resources, holding yourself accountable for improving diversity and inclusion. Another way to see commitment is treating all team members with fairness and respect. Now, fairness and respect, when we're treating people a certain way, we need to make the distinction between equity and equality. Equity means that we are meeting the person where they are and helping them get to the end goal. Equality means we're treating everybody exactly the same, regardless of where they are. And we still have that same objective of getting them to the same goal, but equality won't always do it. So for example, I have 2 sons, and as they were growing up, my older son was very much interested in reading and writing and video games and being on the computer and very cognitive type things. Panned out well. He's a writer, writes in Hollywood for TV and movies. My younger son was very much into being active all the time. Sports was the thing that drove him. He was into anything moving, dealing with sports. And he's working not in the field of sports at this time, but he is working in terms of marketing, and a lot of the competitiveness and things of sports are helping him in his career as well. But as they were coming up, if their dad and I needed to discipline them, if we said to the older son, you can't go outside today, no big deal. He probably wasn't going outside anyway because he was going to stay in and be doing video games or something. If we said to the younger son, you can't watch TV or play video games today, that's okay. I was planning to go outside and play baseball or football or hockey or something anyway. So we can't treat them equally because it's going to have a different result based on who they are. We had to treat them equitably. So one, maybe you can't go outside, and the other one, maybe you're not watching TV, and then the message came through. So we need to make sure that when we're talking about team members, we're talking about fairness and equity, which is not always equality. Commitment it takes commitment to do that because you're going to get pushback. People are going to say, well, that's not fair. He got to go outside. How come I didn't? Or, you're going to get those kinds of, hopefully it won't be outside in the workplace, but you're going to get those kinds of comments from people. Why is it that that individual gets to work from home and I don't? Well, why is it that that individual gets to go to that training class and I didn't? You have to be committed to the cause to be able to explain those things. Commitment requires understanding what makes individuals unique and ensuring they feel connected to the team, and working through obstacles and adapting to meet the needs of others. One of the foundational things of leadership, and I say this to my team all the time, it is my job to create opportunities for them and remove the barriers that get in the way. They do more of the training, consulting, facilitating than I do, because it's my job to create those opportunities for them to do it and to remove whatever barriers might get in the way. The other day, we had a situation where I had a trainer assigned to a class, and as she drove up to drop her daughter off at preschool, they turned her around because they said that she lives in California, and they said someone had tested positive in the school for COVID, and so the school was shut down. She was scheduled to train, but what she did was call back in. Another team member was available and she did the training for her. So we have to work through the obstacles and meet the needs of people. She needed to be home with her daughter. We had to meet her need. Another one is courage. It takes courage to have these difficult conversations. And it takes courage to be transparent and put yourself out there as a leader. So when we talk about courage as one of the characteristics of inclusive leaders, these leaders need to seek feedback and acknowledge their own personal weaknesses. You have to be okay with being transparent so that your employees employees, your team members can see that you are like them. And if you could be successful in the environment, then so can they. Courage involves showing humility and admitting when you've made a mistake. Challenging the status quo. Many times there are people in the organization that know that some of the things that are going on are happening. They know they're not right. They don't personally believe in that, but be an ally, stand up, challenge the status quo, and call out bias when you see it. Being cognizant of some of the biases. So unconscious bias training is a great way of making sure that you are aware, because you don't know what you don't know. And maybe you didn't realize that you had a particular bias going on. There are so many biases I could tell you about that are almost laughable. I don't even know who has time to study some of these things, but studies have shown that blondes make 7% more on average than brunettes and redheads. It's not like people are consciously sitting around thinking they're going to pay blondes more, but in the history of this country, the blonde haired, blue eyed woman in particular was a symbol of beauty. And so if that pattern has gotten into your psyche, remember I said things that get into your subconscious mind are there forever. They don't even have to be logical. But if you have seen it, heard it, experienced it, touched it, tasted it, something through your senses, it's in there. So blondes make more money on average than people with dark hair or red hair. Another one is height in men. Of the Fortune 500 companies in the US, the average, I think it's 36% of the male CEOs are 6'2" or taller. And only 3.9% of the male population is 6'2" or taller. So why do we have so many tall men? It's not like people say, oh, we need a tall CEO, but height is equated with strength and charisma and character and leadership and courage and those kinds of things. And that's what we want at the helm of our organization. So you have to be cognizant of what are your biases, what messages have you received, how are they playing themselves out in your life as you're in charge of other people. So cognizance would cover things like developing an understanding of different kinds of personal biases, such as the implicit stereotypes, groupthink, and confirmation bias. Learning to self-regulate and take corrective steps to ensure fair play. When you become cognizant of your biases, you can then work to eliminate them. Establishing transparent policies for making merit-based decisions about promotions, rewards, and task allocations. Remember, I said some people get opportunities based on potential, others based on track record. Let's level that out and make it the same for everyone. Curiosity. Curiosity is important because you need to become curious and find out what your people need. How can you meet them where they are if you don't know where they are? If you just assume that everyone is just like you, that's going to be a problem. So showing a desire for continuous learning and improvement, accepting your own limitations and seeking diverse perspectives, coping with ambiguity and accepting that some uncertainty is inevitable. Some of us, because of the way we're wired and the way we think, we like for things to be predictable. We like to plan and for processes to fall in line the way we have designed them to. But when you're dealing with people, with individuals who are unique and have different challenges and perspectives, that's not always possible. So you have to be curious and you have to ask questions. Now, in doing that, you have to be careful. You don't want your questions to become microaggressions, and they easily could be. So you don't want to say things to someone like, you don't want to go to a person of color who perhaps has their hair in a very ethnic looking way. How do you get your hair like that? Or how are you able to wear a hat with hair like that? You don't want to say to a millennial, how did you get that job when you're so young? I mean, there's some things that really could be offensive to people. So you have to watch your curiosity, but you want to learn about people. You want to understand what motivates millennials if all you've been managing your entire career has been baby boomers and Gen Xers. So again, curiosity is important. Now, another one is cultural intelligence. Valuing cultural differences and seeking opportunities to learn about other cultures. There are some things that we as Americans do that might be offensive to other people, that might send a different message to other people. And I know some folks want to say, okay, well, this is America, so they need to adjust. Well, do they? I mean, think about it. We're talking about inclusion. So we want to make sure that everyone feels included. And yes, we do have American culture, which is also a part of the workforce culture. But there are some things that could be done differently and with the perspective coming from another culture that might be helpful. With cultural intelligence, we're talking about developing an awareness of how cultural stereotypes can influence expectations. Sometimes all we know about other cultures is what we see on some National Geographic documentary or in a movie, and it could be totally wrong. But it develops stereotypes and expectations. One of those that has become so prevalent in this country, if you look to most IT departments in an American corporation, you're going to see Indians and Asians outnumber most other people or most other ethnic groups. Part of the reason for that is because we have a belief, a stereotype here in America that Asians are good at math and science. So we funnel them towards math and science jobs. Now, if Asians are good at math and science, it's not inherent in who they are as Asians. It's going to be something about their processes. It's something about their educational process, the way they study, the hours in which they study, the type of instruction that they receive. It's things more along those lines. And that stereotype, what it does is put extra pressure on Asians. Sometimes you hear them referred to as the model minority. You know, it puts extra pressure on them. And what about that Asian student who wants to do something creative, doesn't want to go into math and science? And what about that student from Ethiopia or Poland who wants to go into math and science, but they're funneled someplace else because we reserve those positions for the model minority? So we have to think about, even when you think something is positive, you have to be culturally intelligent to understand. When we were consulting in one of the hospital environments, we were met with a story about a woman, I believe was from Korea, who, when she went into labor, one of the traditional things that happens here when you go into labor is that a woman is offered ice chips. You can't really eat anything, but you know, the ice is soothing, it melts so that you're able to stay hydrated, etc. Well, in some cultures, and the Korean culture was one of them, they try to maintain the yin and yang, the balance in their lives. So at that critical time when they're going through labor, they don't need anything extremely cold or extremely hot. Now, that doesn't mean that as a nurse in an OBGYN unit that you need to understand every cultural nuance. But what you can do is ask, is there anything I can give you to help, as opposed to just pushing our traditions on them? Just an example. And cultural intelligence also is accepting that people might need to change their behavior to navigate cross-cultural interactions. Now, that doesn't only mean that those who are not like us might need to change their behavior. We might need to change our behavior as well, because we're trying to mutually adapt, be inclusive, and help everyone feel a sense of belonging. Last but not least, and we're coming close to the end and time for me to take some questions, would be collaboration. Putting together diverse teams and avoiding the appearance of favoritism among members. Building trust so everyone feels comfortable speaking up. Not everyone is as extroverted as perhaps you are. You have to create an environment where people feel comfortable sharing what they know. Create comfort and trust for collaboration. And empowering teams to handle difficult situations and being ready to help address conflict if conflict arises. Conflict is perceived differently in different cultures and it's handled in different ways, but collaboration is key. So those are the 6 qualities that Deloitte says are important to being an inclusive leader. And they are part of what's measured in the survey that I mentioned to you earlier. There are 7 pillars that are mentioned. The one that's not really here has a lot to do with allyship, but there are 7 things mentioned, as well as some workplace things like engagement, etc. So in terms of getting started, you need to collect data, quantitative and qualitative data. You need to establish goals and develop a plan. You need a plan to be more inclusive in terms of your recruitment, your retention, and your development. Implement the plan, evaluate progress, make any changes that you might need to make. That is how you make inclusion profitable. You've got to get the data, have a plan, implement it, and evaluate. Henry Ford said, coming together is a beginning. Keeping together is progress. Working together is success. So in order to truly be a successful organization, we have to make sure that we are working together, and that requires inclusion. I thank you for your time and attention. This is my contact information. Turning Point Leadership Group, again, is the name of my organization. You can email me if I don't get to your question today, or if there's a question you want to do one-on-one, email me, give me a little time to get back to you. And that is the office number. We are still not in the office. We do have someone manning that phone, and they will either take your message or transfer you to my cell phone. So I am going to stop sharing and just see what questions you might have. Or Leah, are there questions or maybe some comments in the chat that you'd like for others to know about?
Yeah, I have a couple questions. And then again, if you guys have any other questions, just go ahead and ask them in that Q&A widget at the bottom of the screen. It says, as you worked with big companies like IBM, what were some of the biggest challenges you experienced in trying to implement diversity and inclusion programs?
Okay, so good question. One thing is the timing factor, because big companies are very risk averse, or they tend to be, and they want to make sure that everything is checked and double checked and rechecked. And I'm not saying that this is a problem, I'm just stating what my observation. So things take a lot longer than many people think that they should, because of the process that we have to go through. And then sometimes what causes bottlenecks is you have people that aren't fully on board. They don't believe in what we're talking about. They're not committed to it. There are still a lot of people who feel as if anyone can be successful in America. You just have to work hard. That's not reality. And so when you have differing opinions, when you have people who are not enlightened, when you have lots of policies and processes and procedures, boxes to check, lots of people to get on board, it takes a lot of time. And so all of those things go into one of the things that makes it harder to do. Another one, and something that we speak a lot on lately, is trust. In larger organizations, because we like to share information on a need to know basis, and so many times people are in the dark, that leaves them feeling like they can't trust management because they don't know what management is up to. Management is not sharing. In an environment where there is no trust, you will not have the sustainability of diversity and inclusion, because people are always going to be questioning what you're doing and why you're doing it, and whether or not they want to fully participate in it. It's no different when you think about, look again to where we are in America today, or in the world today, with the pandemic situation. There are still lots of people, and again, this is not an affront towards anyone, but there are lots of people in America who don't trust the government. So given that the government is pushing COVID-19 vaccines, there are people who are just not going to do it because of that factor alone. It doesn't matter what the CDC and Dr. Fauci and World Health Organization say. So again, we have to look to the broader context. And when you have organizations, and again, this is diversity, so I'm going to go there a little bit. When we're looking to a country that has done things like the Tuskegee experiment, or a country that this is the 100th year anniversary of, the annihilation of Black Wall Street and the problems in Tulsa, Oklahoma. When you have things like that happen and are hidden, there's certain groups of people that learn to distrust the government. And when that happens, they don't participate. So trust has to be a part of the organization. And when you do employee engagement surveys, we find that in the larger organizations, trust is usually low.
All right, we have a couple more. It says, I am having that is the problem I am having in rolling out our DEI awareness training. People are not on board because they think if everyone works hard in America, then they will succeed. How can we get to those individuals?
Usually it has to come from the top. So one of the things that we like to do is one of my clients has been my client at every organization where he's worked as a chief diversity officer. When he changes jobs, he brings us along. And so now I use him many times because he's a C-suite executive to talk to other C-suite executives. And the fact that he's a male helps a lot because, again, gender bias and other things. So many times you have to find someone who is in their minds on their level to talk to them about some experiences and some success stories. We like to start with the top so that we can then have it trickle down, because in most organizations, we will do what leadership tells us to do. And sometimes you have to get in the room and in order to bring the change about. So an example, I had a trainer who was working with one of our clients in New York City. It's a municipal agency. And at the end of the training, he said there was someone in the class who had that very same view, white male. At the end of the class, he said to my trainer, he said, "Lawrence, this really wasn't as bad as I thought it was going to be." So my trainer said, "Oh, so it was bad. It just wasn't as bad as you thought it was going to be." And he kind of laughed it off and he said, "No, it wasn't bad at all. I came in believing certain things about certain people, and now you've got me thinking." Many times that's all we need to do is plant the seed, get them thinking, and then more activities will happen where you just keep watering that seed until it starts to produce some fruit. But I would start at the top, because if we get the top to at least be committed to say, we're going to do this, whether they believe in it or not, really doesn't matter to me. They'll get on board at some point. What we need is for them to be committed to the process and to sort of push it down through the organization, and you kind of build the swell from there.
All right, and I have one more question. It says, I'm a mid-level manager. I treat others with common decency and good manners. I've been trying to educate myself so I don't make mistake of things like microaggressions just out of ignorance. Can you advise how I can become better and educate myself to be more inclusive with my organization?
Yes, so I can send this to Leah and maybe she can get it to you all somehow. There are some books that I will tell you about that are great reads, but I will also tell you to find what I call cultural informants. Let me tell you what that is first, then I'll tell you the books. So the cultural informant is someone who's not like you, but you have a relationship with, and you can ask questions of if you don't really understand what's going on. If you want to be more knowledgeable about certain groups of people. So maybe there's a millennial and you really don't get millennials. You don't understand how they think, why they don't seem to have the same definition of company loyalty as you do, or why they all want to work from home, or whatever your bias happens to be. Find some that you build relationship with and you can bounce things off of. Find some Latina or Latinx, and understand that not every Latinx person is the same. So depending on who's in your workforce, if you have Cubans, you need a Cuban cultural informant. If you have Puerto Ricans, you need a Puerto Rican informant. Cubans and Puerto Ricans don't necessarily think the same or have the same culture. So you've got to get different cultural informants. Get some Black cultural informants, white cultural informants, people who you can build relationship with and legitimately ask questions. Have someone who's an accountability partner who can help let you know when something that you said was just a little off, or maybe this would be a better way of stating it. Now for the books. Not all of them am I going to remember the author, but you can find them all on Amazon. And these aren't necessarily in any particular order of importance, but one good book to read is White Fragility. Robin DiAngelo is the author of that one. That's a great book. It talks about white privilege in a way from a white woman, helping people to understand what we mean by that. There are all kinds of privilege in America. There's male privilege. That's because women are marginalized. It doesn't mean that men are sexist. They are just who most systems were created by and for, so it's from that perspective. Same thing with whites. It doesn't mean that all whites are racist, but many of the systems and the structures in America were created by whites for whites. They didn't necessarily have cultural informants and think about other people, so the systems themselves are racist. A great book is anything by Ibram Kendi. His first name is Ibram, last name is Kendi. He has a book called Stamped. He has a book called How to Be an Anti-Racist. He talks about a spectrum that is so poignant. He talks about the fact that there are racists, non-racist, and anti-racist. I believe that most people in America fall into the non-racist category. So you're not racist. And by the way, just because you're not hanging people from trees and shooting people and those kinds of things doesn't mean you're not racist. Racism has to do with your thought process and what you believe to be true about other people. So you might be, you might be great people, live in mixed neighborhoods, all kinds of things. It doesn't mean you're not racist. However, non-racism is that place in the middle where you know that a lot of what's going on is racism. You don't believe in it, you think it's wrong, but you don't do anything to change the systems. Being anti-racist is when you are calling out the status quo, when you're being an ally for other groups, when you are signing petitions, marching in protest. I mean, the list can go on and on. You don't have to go to the extreme of marching, but do you call things out? Do you review the policies and procedures at work and say, these aren't right, even though they're not affecting you in a negative way? So Ibram Kendi is another good one. There's a book called Inclusion by Jennifer Brown. That's a good one. So those are three, and there are many more out there, but I would say read and find some cultural informants. And for those of you, I see there's some comments talking about awesome presentation. Thank you so much. It honors me. I do this work because I love it. I don't know that I'm necessarily going to see the changes I want to see in my lifetime, but it's not all about me. I have children. I got my first little grandbaby now who due to COVID, because she was born in the UK, I still haven't met her and she's a year old. So pray that I get to see her soon. But yeah, I believe that we all could do so much better if we would get rid of so much of this. So I am honored anytime someone asks me to do the work. It's not for me because I'm not going to see it, but other people will.